Well, I'm now joined by Professor Timmy Gambin, who is from the University of Malta and is head of marine archaeology there. And gosh, Timmy, I mean, you've been doing some amazing stuff over the years, haven't you? Finding aircraft wrecks, now a Phoenician galley, but particularly interest to me, Olympus and of course HMS URGE.
Well, we've got a systematic survey going around the islands, and although we try and be cold scientists and say, we want to map everything that there is on our seabed, when you come across something like Olympus and URGE, two vessels that have such huge human stories, they can't help but grab your attention, and perhaps I spend a little bit more time on vessels such as, like these than I would do on other sites. But one's allowed to have one's favourites, I suppose.
Well, I think one's interest in history always boils down to human drama, doesn't it? I mean, we're obviously interested in why things happen and the way things happen, but ultimately it's that human drama that grabs us, doesn't it? And the human tragedy, of course.
Just last week, we had 4 members of one of the HMS Olympus victims. It's the first time we've had the Olympus families reach out in person. And the incredible thing is that despite the passing of years and generations, there still is a degree of closure that certain families, want and search for. An incredible thing about Marchant, who was one of only 5 bodies to be recovered. Wow. They're buried in the Naval Cemetery in the south of the island. And this was a huge tragedy. There were crew members from 3 submarines, so there was the Olympus crew and remnants of the crews of P-39, P-36. Marchant was going back to the UK. All of the 100+ people got on board except for 13.
So Olympus is, that's an O-class submarine. That's a big
O-class.
So that's a lot bigger than the U-class, Unity class, which was.
It's nearly twice as long. It's 80 something meters. It's a monster. It's the first submarine designed in the wake of World War One, and two of the O-class submarines were actually destined for the Australian Navy, but the massive financial crisis of the late 20s happened, and the Royal Navy ended up keeping them.
Right.
Olympus spent a lot of her time in the Far East, based in Hong Kong, on piracy patrols.
Right. This is in the 20s and 30s?
In the 30s. In the 30s, her crew was known as a happy crew. They were excellent at all sports.
Right.
With this shooting. The thing they were weakest at, strangely enough, was swimming and water polo. So the actual water sports was their weakness. Having said that, more than 10 survivors actually swam, over 5 miles in cold water in strong currents and made it to the shore.
Wow!
So
it's 5 miles out from here, is it?
It's approximately 5 miles out, but I would say that they probably swam more than that because the current would have pushed them away. What we would like to do is some experimental archaeology. We'd like to get a strong swimmer today, put them on the site of the Olympus with whatever clothing they would have had on at the time.
Yes.
We know that they took off their shoes because one of the last memories of the Olympus going down is, from one of the survivors, is sort of seeing a row of over 100 pairs of shoes on the deck, all neatly lined up, and the guy was thinking, we're in the midst of a tragedy, and yet we're still lining up our shoes. So
just tell me very quickly, Bo, what happened to Olympus then?
Olympus, the story of Olympus really starts the night before, the story of its loss.
Yes.
The night before, on the 6th of May.
6th of May.
1942.
Yeah.
So really.
So this is the time
peak.
where the peak of the time, and the 10th flotilla is bugging out of Malta. They've been withdrawn, told to go to Alexandria. So one by one, they're all leaving their base on Manuel Island.
And the 10th flotilla are going east to re-establish their base in Alexandria.
Yes.
Olympus leaves Malta to go west because they need the experienced crews of the U-class submarine, the P-36 and P-39, to man the newly produced U-class submarines that are being sort of churned out in Britain. So the order of the Olympus was to leave, 10 to port, 10 west, and then go via Gibraltar, obviously Gibraltar Straits, to Britain. The night before, so 6th May 1942, the people on guard at St. Elmo, Fort Riccarsley, on the coastal harbour fortifications, heard a murmuring noise, and they alerted the British authorities, and they sent out a Fairmile B ML-130, a motor launch 130, which was a lightly armed vessel, to inspect and see whether they could find out what these murmuring noises were. The next thing that the coastal guards witness is an exchange of fire from multiple directions towards one direction, and then a fire, then an explosion, and ML-130 never returns. What we do know from subsequent, from the German records, is that ML-130 apprehended 3 Schnellboots, including S-31, which is now also on the seabed of Malta, and apprehended them quite literally a kilometre off the coast. That's how close the Germans used to come to lay their mines.
Wow.
So
these Schnellboots are just laying mines?
They were coming very close in obviously total darkness. They were laying mines.
Cutting the engines, chucking them out.
But also chugging at possibly just above idle speed. And that's what the guards heard. We know from Germany...
I'm presuming Olympus would have picked it up on Aztec and all the rest of it, wouldn't it?
No.
No, because they wouldn't. Does that make a difference? No.
This is the night before. There are no submarines out. It's just this motor launch that has gone out.
I see, yeah.
And we know from German records that ML-130 engaged these 3 German E-boats, fast boats, and the captain and 9 of the crew were taken prisoners of war. The Germans boarded ML-130, took maps and other documents, and possibly even weapons, then set the boat on fire. The 4 crew were missing. This was obviously found out after the war because they were taken prisoners of war. Despite this, the Olympus was still given orders to leave the very next morning.
That sounds a little foolhardy, doesn't it?
It does, and to me...
Is that Simpson's decision?
I think that there is a lot of pressure to get these crew members back to Britain. There's a lot of pressure coming from many different directions. So there is the pressure of the Germans possibly invading and pounding the island to bits. There's the pressure to get the crew back. You don't know exactly what happened to the ML-130 because we only know that it was apprehended, from records after the war. And hindsight is a beautiful thing.
Of course.
And when she left, we know that sort of under an hour into her journey, she struck a mine.
Almost certainly laid by one of these Schnellboot?
I'm absolutely certain. Why? Because the German mines were smaller than Italian mines, and the mine damage that we discovered when we dived HMS Olympus is small. In fact, it almost looks not big enough to sink such a huge submarine. We do know that she stayed, afloat for quite some time. 13 men were trapped on board because of where the explosion took.
And of course, they're operating at night, so they're going to be on the surface. They're not going to be
very early morning. They were on the surface, and everybody got on the deck. They tried to shoot their flares, but the flare gun didn't work. They tried to shoot rounds from the gun, but a round got stuck in the chamber. They were actually so desperate that they were trying to hammer cordite out of the shells in order to ignite this, to attract attention from the garrison on Malta. by the time they came up with this idea, the submarine started to list. They were all asked to get into the water, and close to 100 men started slowly but surely swimming towards the shore.
Jesus.
But tradition has it, and I stand to be corrected, that seafarers are not very strong swimmers.
Yeah, that is true, I think.
And I think it's also linked to superstition. And of the close to 100 men who got into the sea, there is a harrowing eyewitness account of people calling out to each other, to make sure their friends were afloat.
Right.
And the answers kept on getting less and less and less, because people were just letting go and letting themselves go underwater. One guy was particularly unlucky, a chap by the name of Talbot. He made it to the shore, but when he stood up, his body just gave way to fatigue and he died of cardiac arrest. Just as he made it to the shore.
Oh, that's terrible.
There were, over 10 survivors, but it still is to this day the largest loss of submariner life in the Royal Navy history.
Is that incredible?
Yep. So,
and it's 5 miles down that way.
It is just off Fort St. Elmo, where we're sitting now.
Yeah, amazing. And what about URGE? You found URGE in 2019. And this is, I've got to say, this is a particular interest to me because a friend of mine is Jim Tomkinson, who is Tomkinson's grandson, I think. And Francis Dickinson is another friend, of course, who is also
the grandson.
Who is also the grandson. So both Jim and Francis are grandsons of Tomkinson. And Tomkinson was second to Wanklyn and URGE second to Upholder in terms of most successful.
Yes, and they were two very, very. They were close friends as well.
Yes.
There was the Upholder, there was the URGE, there was the Polish submarine as well, which was also very successful, and its skipper also very close to Tomo and Wanklyn. The story of the URGE, for me personally, starts in. I'll just take a step back.
Yeah, do.
We knew HMS Olympus was sunk in Maltese waters. Why? Because survivors made it to the shore. They told the garrison that.
Yep.
They told the garrison that
So you know pretty much where to look.
More or less where to look. A generic area of where it was. It was just a question of time until we surveyed that particular block.
And how deep on the surface was
It's
Olympus?
About 115 meters. It's in the same zone of
long way, isn't it?
No, it's a long way down, which makes it all the more challenging for us when we go to explore and record it. With URGE, it's completely different because URGE. The people knew that something happened to URGE when she didn't turn up in Alexandria 3 days later. So, in reality, it could have been anywhere between, just outside Valletta, where we are now, to just outside Alexandria.
And there's that lunatic who thinks it's off the coast of Tunisia, isn't there?
I wouldn't even... I won't even give the time of day to that claim. Actually, I lie. When I saw that claim in 2015, and I saw the sonar image on which he was basing that claim, to be honest, without knowing anything about URGE, before I ever met Francis Dickinson, I already had very, very, very serious doubts about what that image was showing, and about the research done into a claim based on such a loose.
Yeah, that's absolutely
But anyway,
nonsense.
It was not, so to speak, on my radar of ships that may or may not be. So, for example, a vessel that is on our radars, ML130.
Right.
We know that it was lost, on the 6th of May 1942. So we know that it's somewhere. Off Valletta in the area of Olympus and so on. So that is something that we actively, if we have a sonar target, we say, okay, if the measurements are right, if the dimensions are right, could this be ML130? With URGE, this notion didn't exist at all. It just was not on our radar. I was contacted by Francis Dickinson, who is the grandson of Commander Tomkinson.
Yep.
Together with Platon Alexiadis, who's a very, very, very knowledgeable naval historian, I must say. And they asked me, whether I had anything that looks like a submarine in my existing sonar data, which I did not. I looked, and therefore, would I be interested to search for the submarine, which, obviously I was. Not only because I enjoy finding things on the seabed, it's the thing that I enjoy most, as part of my job, but more so because of the human story. I was, so gripped by the fact that the daughter of the commander, who never knew her father, was still alive.
Yes.
The fact that now I was made aware of this crazy claim and its link to, a possible wreck in Maltese waters. So it took us 3 years from initial sort of introduction to organizing logistics of a sonar search. We based our search.
But did you have any leads at all that it might be close to Valletta?
Look, the original naval reports were probably mined off Valletta.
Right.
Then some Italian researchers followed the lead from an Italian Air Force report,
right.
Okay, that suggested that an Italian plane sunk an English submarine off Libya. A claim that was never verified then. So that created a bit of doubt. Obviously, this would have meant that Tomo kind of disobeyed orders.
Which is unthinkable, really.
No, absolutely. Especially when you see his track record and the track record of all the commanders of the Fighting Tent. They were, exemplary to the very end.
Yeah.
So the question that, if we have no inkling of where it could be, you still need a place to start. And the place we started was
But did you? Sorry to interrupt. Did you ever sort of think, was this? I'm intrigued, but this is needle in a haystack stuff. I mean, is it worth my time and effort to kind of look into this, where there's such a remote chance of finding it in the big scheme of things?
Yes. The simple answer, yes, I honestly did think that, and it's thanks to the perseverance of Francis that he kind of made me come down from that stance. And once sort of I backed down from that initial stance, then we had to come up with some kind of plan. We can't just sort of close our eyes, put our finger on the nautical chart and say, okay, we're going to start here.
You're right.
So together with Clayton and Francis, we strategized a bit. We did some research, archival research, and came up with the maps of with German maps of the Italian and German minefields. Mm-hmm. And going on what the original orders of for Tomo were, for the urge to leave and then, take a 70-degree heading from the St. Elmo light, the lighthouse.
So you can narrow it down a little bit.
Yes, so you can narrow it down a little. You kind of make it. You overlay the minefield. Mm-hmm. The first 2 or 3 days were tough. We were finding nothing. But I mean, when I say nothing, and generally off Malta, nearly every few square kilometers has at least a piece of a plane that got shot up in the air war, but this was nothing. Then we moved to a different zone that was also part of the minefield, and she was there. She was there, and
amazing.
Really
so what is the work you're doing? You're not sort of crawling around in. I mean, how are you picking that up at this stage?
It's a very good question. My team, we operate an AUV, an automated underwater vehicle, which is, I'm very proud to say, a state-of-the-art robot.
Yes. So you go out to sea on a ship.
You
on a boat.
You pre-program this robot, which looks like a torpedo, very much like a torpedo.
Let it go from the side of the boat. Down it goes.
It dives. It takes a GPS reading, and then it can work out where it is through a whole system of, a gyro compass and so on. So it's got its own navigation system.
And you're on the boat, and you're looking at monitors and stuff.
You're looking at a monitor, hoping, praying to
and just looking at endless amounts of sea.
That the that a ping comes up, because the only thing that's telling you that the robot is still on track is this red dot that comes up every few minutes.
Right.
So we plan what's called a lawnmower pattern.
Yes.
So quite literally, you're sending this robot up and down a pre-programmed path. And
dare I ask, Timmy, I mean, is this an expensive operation? Or is it once you've got the kit, it kind of...
The kit is extremely expensive.
But once you've got it...
I won't mention numbers because it's vulgar, but it's also very expensive to maintain. It's just come back from its 3 factory maintenance in Iceland. And but,
it's there to be used, right?
It's got to be used. We're lucky that as a university we have this robot, so our students get to use it, and we make a lot of incredible discoveries. And this URGE was absolutely mind blowing. But
I think I need to become a student again.
or join us on one of the expeditions.
Well, that would be amazing.
So
I'd sign on the dotted line right away.
Once we recover the robot, we drive back, we rinse it, and then we download the data. And this is the apprehension time. After 7 hours of boredom, watching a red dot or hoping for a red dot to appear. You're at work, you're at the office, you've got a specialized software suite, and you're pulling up these sonar files and scrolling. There could be anything, from a torpedo from World War I to a World War II submarine. We found Cold War planes in our sea, so there's anything and everything, quite literally. And it was on day 3 or day 4 that we located her on with our sonar.
And how did you know it was her? So you knew it was a submarine, first of all. You knew it was a Unity class submarine.
And also we were lucky that at that time there was a research vessel that we do a lot of work with, and they're ROV pilots. So an ROV is a remote operated vehicle. So it's a robot with a cable. So it's not autonomous. And the ROV has a camera. So a sonar image will tell you, look, you have a plane. Maybe
because you can see it's got wings.
Yes, it's got wings, and maybe if the sonar image is good enough, you can say it's a twin-engined plane.
Right.
But you need an eye on the prize. You need a camera to tell you if it's a JU-88 or a BF-110, etc. So this coincidentally, this research vessel, the Hercules, had the ROV pilot in. I went out. We took Platon. We took Francis out. We put the ROV in. Now here is a small catch. There are other submarines in our waters, but these were salvaged from the harbors where they were sunk. Expensive items, costly items taken from them, such as the propellers, then dumped out at sea in order to help train ASDIC operators. So the crucial thing is...
So it's a bit like using old tanks as target practices on the planes. It's the same principle.
Absolutely. Keep in mind, Malta was a NATO base up until 1979, and ASDIC in 1960, was at level 1, and then ASDIC in 1975 was level 10. It was just a question of you still needed targets on the seabed to train your operators. So the first thing I asked the ROV pilot to do was to go to the aft section, because if the vessel had propellers, then we would be certain that this vessel was lost during active operation, because there's no way they would salvage a vessel and then tow her out and dump her with all the expensive.
But from your initial discovery of it, you could tell it was almost certainly a Unity class. Could you? From the shape of it, the image?
No, and this is one of the things that fooled me, because with our sonar imagery, we're able, and our specialized software, we're able to measure our targets. And this particular target measured no less than 5 meters less than what a U-class submarine was meant to measure, and soon I'll explain why.
Yes.
So it looked like a submarine.
Yeah.
I was convinced it was a submarine, but I had my doubts as to whether it was URGE. So we went to the stern, we saw propellers, and I was convinced, okay, now we have a submarine
that was sunk in war.
That was sunk in action. This was confirmed when we started moving forward and we came across the gun, and it was exactly the same gun that would have been, placed on a U-class submarine. We kept on going forward towards the bow section. I was, hoping to say, okay, maybe my sonar, had a dip and shortened the target, or there was a bug in the computer software. And I was hoping to see the bow of the ship and the bow of the submarine and the torpedo tubes to come up, to help with the final classification. And this is where we were blown away. The bow of the submarine is literally shorn off. It's as though someone took a saw and just
chopped it off.
Chopped it off at the first bulkhead.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back shortly. See you in a moment. Welcome back to We Have Ways of Making You Talk.
What happened to the submarine was it hit a mine, started to propel itself towards the seabed. It hit the seabed possibly at something like 45 degrees. And we do have submarines off Liguria in Italy, also in the Baltic, that are stuck in the sediment at 45 degrees. And when this vessel hit the sediment at 45 degrees, it's a soft sediment, and remember, the engines would have still been running, and the pressure of the water pushing her down, she would have impacted the sediment, penetrated 5 meters, and because the mine hit in the bow area, she snapped at the first bulkhead. So the 5 meters that had fooled us
are still in the sediments.
Are actually just in front of her in the sediments, probably with 4 torpedoes still in the tubes.
Wow. And so when did you kind of twig this? This was when the camera went down.
When we had the camera down, and this was, a real eureka moment. I'm forever grateful that we were able to share this moment with Francis, who was on board, and Playton as well. And we got some, relatively decent footage. We went back and surveyed in very high resolution sonar, so we got some great sonar images. And, a few months later, and we delayed the announcement of its discovery to ensure that we could get all the legal protection, etc., in place. And we announced the discovery in November of 2019 with the memorial planned and unveiling of a memorial planned for April 2020.
Of course.
We all know what happened in 2020, an invisible, a war against an invisible enemy, 2 years of delays with COVID. But what we did manage to do in 2021, my dive team, which is, these are incredible people who travel on a volunteer basis. They take time off their work from Belgium, Finland, UK to come and dive, to come and help me explore these sites. So
you've dived on it?
Yes, sir. In April 2021, we dived the site. We recorded it in 3D. We have a absolutely fantastic 3D photogrammetric model, which is now on our virtual museum. And one of the things that we discovered during the dives were the letters URGE on the port side of the conning tower. So any doubts that anybody could have had, I had no doubts. Francis had no doubts.
My friend Steve Prince, who's the head of the Naval Historical Branch, has no doubts.
No, but this to me clinched it, because now there were the letters URG welded on onto the side. So we believe that was worth another release, to kind of any doubts, any lingering doubts are now dispelled through to the discovery of the name. Fast forward to literally 2.5 weeks ago, many of the original team came back, and we had to dive again because we had to lay a memorial plaque. The submarine service of the Royal Navy provided us with an ensign, which we dove down. We dived and took the ensign down 115 meters and opened it up in honor of the 44 submariners that lost their lives.
Because there's 32 on the crew, weren't there?
There were 32 on the crew, 12 passengers, including
and they're from another submarine,
no, also Royal Navy personnel. There was also a journalist, which is, something that I think an intrepid historian like you could look into. There are various question marks. I met his grandson, an incredible guy, and he actually in one of the events related to the memorialization of URGE, he read the last letter written by his grandfather, this very well-known, intrepid journalist, promising his wife, telling his wife, look, I'm doing something tomorrow that's very dangerous. And I promise you, this is the last one. This is the last time. I want to come home, spend time with the kids. And it killed, I couldn't hold back my tears. I have to admit, I'm a big burly guy, but that just made me, crumble.
Yeah, this is
just as meeting Francis's mother made me crumble. The fact that this is an 80-year-old woman who was brought up under the shadow of this, father who was a hero, so very present,
yes,
and very absent at the same time.
Tompkinson, DSO and bar.
Exactly.
Could have easily got a Victoria Cross.
And then I think should have got a Victoria Cross.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, let's just for a moment, let's just dwell on what URGE achieved. I mean, it managed to hit the battleship Vittorio Veneto.
Yes.
Sunk a cruiser, the Giovanni delle
Bandiniere.
I mean, those are two massive hits.
And
sunk all manner of Axis shipping.
The strange coincidence with regard to URGE is that Giovanni delle Bandiniere was actually discovered in the same year.
What, 2019?
Yep. By an Italian team, obviously in Italian waters at a massive depth of 900 meters.
Oh my goodness me, that's properly deep.
But I find that, of course it's a coincidence, but the synergy is you cannot
escape it, can you?
You cannot ignore it. And also the interesting fact about Tomo is his submarines are pretty cramped spaces even today by modern standards.
I know.
He was 6'5".
Was it? I hadn't realised he was so tall.
He was 6'5", so a very, very, very sort of imposing, but a very imposing man, but dearly loved. And when you see photographs of him, the smile is just radiates through those old black and white photos. Absolutely amazing guy. And
as was Wanklyn. I mean, you get that with Wanklyn as well.
With the tragedy of the URGE story is, we have all these letters. So the letters, the letter written by the journalist who's leaving, the letters written by Tomo to his wife.
And they're very touching, aren't they?
Because they were leaving to set up base in Alexandria, the letters that would have been replies to those sent by the men to the UK, so those sent by the women or relatives from the UK to Malta, are actually still on the ship. Because they weren't going out on patrol. So you go out and you find your lovely box of love letters back at the base. You're taking them with you because you don't know if you're going back to Malta. So, in a way, one side of the human story is lost.
Yes.
And one of the things we were discussing during the memorialization, so with Royal Navy service personnel, I never served in the Navy, but I did work on a research vessel, and I would be gone for months at a time. And it's strange because those leaving always think that they have the hard time, they're leaving their home, but in actual fact, over time you realize that it's those left behind who have the hardest time.
Yes.
They need to take care of the children. They need to make sure that, it seems as though life is continuing as usual.
Sure.
So it must have been very, 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 very tough.
And the uncertainty, he's been lost at sea, but you don't know where, and you don't know, none of the 44 that were lost, none of the relatives would know where. There's no closure, is there? And lost at sea is a terrible thing, really.
And this is, I think, something that I think your audience would sort of love to grasp, in the sense that my wife's grandfather landed on Juno Beach.
Wow.
So if I want to or choose to, I can go there. I know he didn't die there, but I can stand on the beach where he landed and kind of enjoy his memory in that way. If somebody was lost during D-Day, then in all probability you could visit his grave, in Normandy. When somebody is lost at sea, where do you memorialize the individual if you don't know the location of the site? Do you do it in his hometown with an empty grave, as there are quite a few in Britain? Do you do it on the island where he was based, but the ship could be 400 nautical miles away? So here we have an example of how an archaeological study, because even though it's an 8-year-old ship, it's still archaeology, how a maritime archaeological site actually now is elevated to a kind of higher degree of importance. I know I'm not trying to make it sound lofty, but when you personally witness, close to 50 relatives throwing white lilies into 44 white
emotional
lilies, they now know the exact place where the vessel of their loved ones was lost, and that brings closure, even if 8 years have passed since the incident.
Yes, I can completely see that, and I always think what must be so frightening about being sunk on a submarine, whether it's a German U-boat or whether it's a Unity class boat like Urge. All those crew are going to know what their fate is for some time before they die. And it's not the moment of death that's so scary. It's the contemplating the moment of death, isn't it? That's the difficulty about how we deal with the end of our life.
Especially if you're 20 or 21
Right.
years old and you have the rest of your life in front of you, because
Of course.
you're contemplating.
So Tomkinson is going to know that this is it.
And he's never going to see his daughter.
Never going to see his
walk,
daughter.
learn how to speak.
And how in those last minutes do you deal with that? I mean, it's too tragic for word, and it's upsetting, and I can completely see why. I mean, crikey, I'd have been blubbing too. I mean, particularly when you're so emotionally involved in it, because although it's not your family, you've become a great friend with Francis, obviously.
No, but they've adopted me.
And they've adopted you.
They have adopted
so
me.
you are kind of family
Yes,
in a
yes.
way. But you've been there. You've swum over. You've dived over Urge. You've seen it.
I actually,
with your own eyes.
So
You've touched it, right?
One of our policies is look, no touch. So we do.
You don't touch it at all.
as much as possible. But the urge,
Because it's a war grave, right?
yes, absolutely. But the urge was I was too emotionally involved not to touch that wreck, and I touched the name. I touched the E at the end of Urge because it was just too much for me, and I think you're absolutely right about the tragedy of those last moments. But again, coming full circle to the memorialization, it kind of supports everything that we did. The unveiling of the memorial,
Yes.
the flower,
Yeah.
the wreaths and so on, because you have to honor not just their memory but also their suffering. And you have to honor that, and sort of that suffering that you said, that last moments, at least now has been recognized, not just by the families, because the location of the monument is where it is, on the ramparts of Fort St. Elmo, where well, quite literally, hundreds of tourists pass by, visit every year. The Fort St. Elmo house is home to the War Museum. And now the memory of Urge and her men and the passengers that were lost on board is to be shared by everybody.
Yeah, that's great. It's wonderful. I think it's brilliant what you've done. And you've also done lots of aircraft wrecks as well, of course.
I think you're going to have to invite me back for that, because if we start talking
we'll
aircraft,
never stop.
If we start talking aircraft,
okay, that's a tantalising dangle in front of us, to talk about aircraft losses. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I had my own piece of serendipity when I was literally the first thing I did when I was first got involved in Siege of Malta and the Malta's War was I went to the Imperial War Museum and I looked at these papers from one of the senior matrons up at Imtafa. And in amongst her papers was a letter from a mother of an airman who died. And the letter said, thank you so much for taking the trouble to write, etc., etc. The last paragraph was, one day when this cruel war is over, I'm going to visit Malta and see where my boy is buried. He was 19 years old. And anyway, I then was over in Malta and I was recounting this story to Ray Polidano over at
the Aviation Museum.
He said, come with me. I said, that's a bit of Alex Mackey's Hurricane. It was just extraordinary. I mean, of all the wrecks.
We work very closely with the Aviation Museum. I've got a fantastic working relationship and friendship with David Polidano.
Yes, he does excellent work.
And I mean,
he's trying to get a Gloss Gladiator.
Yes, that's right. And thanks to him, I mean, I can't say that I'm no aviation expert, but I can recognize an RE201 from a Mach 202, which, not many people can.
No. But these are important distinctions.
But he can recognize something quite literally from a fragment, because he's my go-to.
Yes. His knowledge is immense, isn't it? Because he's been living it for such a long time, and also because he's restored these things, so he knows them so intimately.
Look, we recently surveyed the Hurricane, and I showed them a piece, and they said, that's a Hurricane radiator, and look, Jerry got him because there are 6 bullet holes in the radiator, and he actually saw from the photograph, recognized. Now, I've dived that site 3-4 times. I've seen this object 3-4 times, and I've got to make sure that we're, coming up safe and so on. But he's got that eye for detail, and there are amazing stories to tell with regard to the aviation archaeology on the seabed of Malta and Gozo.
Wow. Well, come on again.
I'd be more than welcome. It's an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Well, to me, what an amazing story. Thanks for joining me.